You stand on one of the summits of a mountain range, the only real mountain range that exists in the world. An expanse of lush grass shoots outward in every direction in the distance below, as geysers of warm geothermally heated water slosh behind you, bubbling beside glistening snow. The sound of howling wind bounces off the solid rock walls, while you breathe in the cool, refreshing atmosphere of what you've called home since you were born. You take a sip of the fresh water, and are dazzled when you see a familiar light shimmer over the horizon. You've seen it thousands of times now. After all, the days here last longer than the years do. Yet those sweet shards of light never cease to feel like pillows upon your skin, lightening your burdens and making you happier with each passing second. You feel this despite the heat that has become nearly unbearable now, the color of that light becoming a menacing red, and knowing that this previously welcoming usher of day has now become the foreboding executioner of all days to come. Your sun is dying. And like the flash of a frying pan, so too will fizzle the world you've known and the people in it. It is the end of us, the end of history, the end of time. And as though suffocated by the gravity of that expanding helium giant, you sense that at this point, like many times you've seen with his sister the moon, he has even grown large enough to eclipse emotion, too. You feel a rush of wind and the air almost sucked out of your nostrils. You know that it's starting. He shrinks away, letting darkness overtake your world for a brief second, before striking a resounding clap, and you feel the energy surround you. Trees evaporate as the very planet's crust melts away in a wash of light. You didn't tell anyone about it. Not this time. Let them experience these moments like any other day. The flowers smell sweeter if you take the time to breathe, not a luxury afforded to those occupied with fear. Shadows overtake you, then suddenly, you gasp for breath. You look around in slight shock, then let out a disgusted sigh. The curse isn't over yet. We're back to square one. Another 22 minutes until it ends. Another 22 minutes catalyzed by the last. To what end? What I just described is the core concept of Outer Wilds. You'll find yourself as mystified by its vistas as you are by the introspective anxiety that it can make you feel. However, we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about how this game ends. And because of the very nature of that topic, I highly recommend if you haven't actually beaten this game, do that first, okay? For the rest of you, congratulations! You know the personalities, ambitions, and pain of a civilization of virtual ancient scribbles better than you may know yourself at this point. Your struggle was a desperate one. Once you got past the lighthearted exterior of being a space explorer, acutely touching your webbed Hearthian toes on your own moon for the first time, and discovering an ancient orrery that tracks the positions of your solar system's planets, it didn't take long before you were scrambling through the base of an hourglass, praying to be lifted from its cavernous depths before the ceaseless sea of sand cracked you into a gory astronaut pancake. All for the sake of understanding just one more deeply buried detail about the culture of the Nomai, an ancient race upon whom your continued theoretical survival depended. The moment that same orrery targeted the eye of the universe and started to frantically spin at a harrowing pace, it made you feel anxious. Sure, you are in the center of this tool created by an ancient and intelligent alien race, so it can't be too dangerous, but you can't help feeling that one small misstep would be the difference between being a casual observer and being a fresh coat of paint for the spinning arches and swiveling gears. Or how about that moment when you found yourself a layer of sand above what would be a quantum rock, but having never discovered it, the only thing you did understand was that suddenly an army of enraged cacti appeared to be deliberately attempting to fuse their spines with your skin. Every world is its own confined playground, where the inhabitants of that world live, learn, and grow. A home upon which to thrive and an existence deliberate and intentional. But to navigate the space in between those worlds feels frighteningly vast. Like traveling across a great chasm in which there is nothing, never was anything, and to be gripped by it is akin to one day becoming nothing. Or to be on the horizon of a large planet and to see it from the context of the void, as the threatening invasion of existence into the tranquil grotto of a still and endless night, and to find even this instills fear in you, because no matter where you stand, you exist where nothing does, an invader in a strange, landless land whose people are shadows and whose intention is unknowable. Your presence in the space betwixt worlds is a direct defiance to the will of God. But you find solace in knowing that you are not the first to defy divine expectations. Before you came an intrepid group of similarly heathenous lawbreakers, seeking something you couldn't conceptually comprehend, and neither could they. The eye of the universe. You discover quickly that your perpetual 22-minute cycle of misery is not an act of God, but a scientific cog in the master machine of this ancient race in its pursuit of the eye. Something they wished for so desperately that they were willing to compromise their own ethics to attempt to destroy the sun so that they could use the energy of its destruction to fuel the provocation of a supermassive black hole whose power output would be high enough to dilate time within its radius by 22 minutes, thereby sending the coordinate memories of a probe cannon back in time 22 minutes so that it can calculate a new random trajectory for itself to fire a probe that could provide them the exact warp coordinates for the location of the eye of the universe. As the firing of the probe would compromise the integrity of that station, this was the only way they could make the experiment repeatable long enough to navigate through all the potential permutations of coordinate directions that the probe could be fired. What's more, you only became aware of this loop upon the 9,318,054th permutation of launch attempts, indicating that even before you, this loop had been in the process for 389 years. On top of all that, the plans to force a supernova failed, so the loop was only able to begin at the natural death of your own sun, 281,042 years after the Nomai experiments. With each passing loop, history is rewritten. The previous timeline is erased so that death never happened, though the awareness of its passing still exists in the present reality. Thanks to the efforts of this alien race, you were able to learn the coordinates necessary to reach the eye of the universe, and while returning to their original crash landing vessel was never in the plans or cards of the original Nomai's vision, you were able to connect the dots that would get you there. The frustrating reality for the Nomai is perhaps the most challenging thing to wrestle with, however. Their civilization existed long enough to eke out a life in your solar system for nearly 2 generations. Amazing, considering the catastrophic crash landing in Dark Bramble, one of the most violent and ghastly places in the solar system, a crash that led to the tragic end of a third of their ship's crew and the ship's captain due to oxygen depletion from being unable to navigate the vast matrix of recursive fog rooms that make up Dark Bramble's interior, and left the remaining 2/3 split across differing and somewhat inhospitable worlds, all in the name of trying to warp to the eye. Those who remained were inspired even further to continue pursuing their life's work. So how painful it must have been for them to have arrived to the correct conclusions and gotten the necessary information needed only to have their efforts and knowledge of their success ripped away by the jaws of mortality when a rogue comet filled with an unknown and deadly substance suddenly erupts this material across the solar system, instantly wiping out the alien colonies and any further work they might have done to pursue the logical conclusions of their research. Those that discovered it spent their final moments horrifically aware of the impending peril this would bring upon their civilization and culture. They will never know how close they came, or be able to see the eye they pursued so fervently for themselves. For it is at the eye of the universe that Outer Wilds can take its virtual fiction and turn it into something that could be an eye-opening experience for most people. You arrive at the eye of the universe, a large, unknowable space derived of the quantum rock you've seen shards of before in your solar system, adopting the elements of quantum science by directly defying all natural laws of physics. It can be in more than one place at once, only retains a shape when directly observed, and can be a part of and influence the existence and malleability of the things around it at will. While terrifying, you manage to navigate the maelstrom surrounding the eye's center, that maelstrom being flashes of lightning that breathe life into trees, bushes, and creatures before just as quickly snuffing it out with each flicker. The eye's center creates a cohesive world for you, a world that is predominantly comprised of memories and thoughts that were meaningful for you. The thick underbrush and trees that comprise the homeworld where you grew up, played, and where you interacted with the living, breathing inspirations who led you to pursuing a life as an astronaut. All of this eventually ends with you becoming the observer, the one element needed to allow the quivering quantum nothing state between an unattained possibility and reality to be manifested, and for a new universe to be born, as you had just watched the last few flickers of suns die out in the universe you had once known. A dead and past reality that expired in the heat death of that universe. You knew in this moment that your home was gone, and that much like when you were caught in the vast empty spaces between worlds, you now, more than ever, no longer belonged. And in observing the next Big Bang to usher in new life and new possibilities, you must gasp your last breath. There was no stopping the inevitability of your fading universe, but you were able to preserve a continued cosmic existence in itself. You had to accept that you were unfortunate enough to be born at the natural death and end of the universe, an inescapable and necessary stage that exists in all things, small and grand. In an interesting Gamma Sutra interview, Alex Beecham, the lead developer of Outer Wilds, who first started creating the game as his master's thesis project for the University of Southern California, cites 2001: A Space Odyssey as one of a few inspirations for having players navigate a world driven by forces beyond their control. Because of its abstract nature, it's difficult to spoil the ending of Space Odyssey per se, but some interpretations could boil it down to a concept from philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche's book Thus Spake Zarathustra, wherein it posits moral and spiritual ideals that would be rewarding in helping humans ascend to another state of existence and evolution without otherworldly encouraging factors or religious motivation. Outer Wilds takes notes from this, but does not tread the same ground, showcasing instead another concept from Thus Spake Zarathustra known as eternal recurrence. The concept is a thought experiment that in modern terms could be simplified to: is what I'm experiencing now in this moment something I'd be willing to experience again should I ever have to repeat this life in infinite repetition? The question is mechanically explored in the time loop cycle of the game, but also interestingly figures into this ending, that the inevitable death and rebirth of the universe can be viewed as a purpose of life in and of itself. That the finite amount of cells, matter, and existence in the universe can one day be collapsed to this central, physically inexplicable, nearly imperceptible, and scientifically elusive source, before being exploded out and reborn again as anything that has ever existed never wasn't from the eye, and all things spawned eventually return to it in infinite recurrence. Sound familiar? Outer Wilds' ending is a beautiful marrying of science and philosophy that captures these concepts and the comfort they can offer in a way that words, books, and even film could never achieve. For that reason, I know I'll hold this game in high esteem for some time, and don't doubt that it should be recognized as one of the better games to emerge from this decade, for daring to try and help us better understand ourselves as individuals, as people, as humans. That was a much more serious video than I'd initially planned, but I appreciate all of you who watched and hope you found it enjoyable. We'll aim for some more lighthearted content for the next few videos, but I couldn't help talk about this game's ending, especially when I saw that, in the interest of not spoiling anything, people were avoiding discussing this aspect of the game that I think deserves analysis and thought. If you did enjoy this video, please remember to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell to get notified when I post new content. And if you haven't yet and are also a fan of games with time loop concepts, feel free to check my Substantial video on Majora's Mask. Link should be on the screen right now. For other content from me, you can watch me on Twitch Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time. You can join my sleepy Discord server, the Timbertaft, to be part of the community, contribute to my Patreon to help with the show's production costs, and you can also listen to my fortnightly podcast with fellow co-hosts Ken and Kyoryu Hunter on the Potosaurus. Links in the description. I appreciate you all, and I'll see you next time.